So I have the pleasure of speaking with Indestructoboy. Thank you so much for willing to take time out of your life. I know you have a lot going on with your YouTube channel and your Kickstarter, so I definitely appreciate that.
Okay, now you can hear me. All right. All right. Well, I guess yeah, give me the thanks again. But yeah, thanks for kind of I guess filling me in on what this format is and everything. I'm super stoked to see what comes of it.
Yeah, likewise. Like I said, I don't see people in the TTRPG space using spaces. I've joined a couple. I'm very new to Twitter as a whole. I just kind of,
Mm,
for whatever reason, decided to make one and kind of figuring all this stuff out.
yeah, here at the death of the the death of the platform. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I kind of came a little too late here. So it's just kind of curious, just kind of breaking the ice a little bit. Do you like to read novels?
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't know actually. Wait, no, that's showing my TTRPG shelf. Yeah. So just like everybody on YouTube has their like D&D shelf and everything like that. Over to my left side, maybe that'll show. Yeah, there's like my like fantasy novels kind of piled up over there. I've been on a big sci-fi kick here lately. I'm actually weirdly enough. I got into the Night Flyers show that was like a sci-fi original, and I thought that was really sick. I started reading Death in Space by Free League and Stockholm Cartel, and that just like for whatever reason put me on this whole like doomed space like dark fantasy whatever you want to call it kick. And so I actually picked up the book Night Flyers, and I've been reading that like crazy. But yeah, I am like super into reading. I try to get I try to get at least 10 books in a year. I know it doesn't sound like too much, but considering the amount of like game material and stuff I read, I feel like I don't usually count like TTRPG books. I feel like those are always like a light skim.
Right, right.
But yeah,
Awesome, man. Well, I never heard of Night Flyers or Death in Space, so I'll
it's by
definitely.
George R. R. Martin.
Okay, cool. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, before he did Game of Thrones, he was a dark sci-fi writer. And a little bit of like funny TTRPG trivia I learned. He there was a book that he wrote that included a dead race called the Gith Yankee, and a fan, like a D&D fan, was like really into the Gith Yankee as Martin was describing them, and wrote it as like a homebrew race and submitted it to White Dwarf and this magazine that TSR used to publish. And TSR loved the homebrew so much they adapted it into like the D&D, panopticon or whatever you want to call it, and they eventually just became like an official thing for D&D accidentally. And so it's like George R. R. Martin had a hand in creating the Give Yankee.
That's wild. That is very interesting. I'm gonna let me make a note of that. I want to explore that. That's cool. I had no idea at
Yeah.
all. So speaking of like TTRPGs, how did you find your way to them?
Oh boy. So my first exposure to TTRPGs was, I want to say, about like 2011, 2010, where my mom was dating a guy who was really into TTRPGs. I'd never really gotten into like tabletop role playing games, but I was always really into like Final Fantasy. I grew up with Pokemon, Fire Emblem. And I love like tactical strategy games. So like Civ, I'm a Civ nut, really. So really, I got this this boyfriend of my mom's told me about this game that they were playing called D&D, and I think at the time it was 3.0. I don't know if it was, I say 3.0, third edition. Wow. Um, but it was either third edition or 3.5, and I remember going and just kind of feeling like I didn't know really what was happening. I mean, that was also me in my like frat boy party days, anyways. So, as far as I was concerned, it was like there's too much. This is a game. What, I didn't quite get it at the time. And then around 2015, maybe 2014, I was always a big fan of Community, and then I followed Harmontown, and then Harmontown turned into Harmon Quest, And I was like, "Oh, wait, this is D&D? Okay." So I looked into more of it. I found Acquisitions Incorporated and Adventure Zone. What's funny is at Critical Role was my last stop in the like, actual play space. And I got started playing D&D in about like 2015, like really playing it and being like, I get it now. Oh, this is why it's cool, right? And from there, it was just like I I I I think I started doing the game design side of it whenever I was like, there's so many holes in 5e. We need more classes. My brain was just so like Final Fantasy and like Dragon Quest baked that I'm like, we need more. There could be so much more. So I got started in the game design, just home brewing for D&D, and now making my own game, and yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely want to dive into that. But asking beforehand, so what does the hobby as a whole do for you?
the, oh, what does the hobby as a whole do for me? Could you, could that be a little bit more specific?
Yeah, like so I guess for me it gives me an avenue to create and just kind of
Okay.
build that sort of thing.
Yeah, for me, it's always been about like an excuse to get friends together, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
as I got older, as a jazz musician, I'll go out and play gigs with people and stuff. But like, that's usually how I would kind of meet up and see my music friends on a regular occasion, right? Almost like a work kind of thing. But whenever I think with TTRPGs, it was like, yeah, but what about my like non-music and like nerdy friends? Are we like getting together or whatever? And I think as you get into your like 20s, especially your late 20s and your 30s, it just gets to be really hard to keep friend groups together and like regularly meeting or whatever. And D&D was a way for us to be like, no, we want to get together. We want, we almost feel a commitment, right? Like we need to be here. And so yeah, that was, I love the social aspect of it, and just the idea that like, I think with game design wise, it was seeing what kind of like, how far can I push this system, you know? Like every class I've written now, I've tried to see what I could do to like stretch 5e until it breaks, and then once it does break, figure out how to reel it back in, make it work again. But yeah, the creative outlet, the social aspect of it, and now I guess the community building and career aspect of it, having this Discord now where there's like, I guess 800 people who think they they want to hear what I say for some fucking reason. Or, well, sorry about the cuss, but yeah, yeah, it's kind of wild. I would have never thought in 2015 that here 8 years later, I would be top 10 of the DMs guild with like two products and like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, man. One question I want to ask because you're the first musician that I've interviewed. How has being because I'm somewhat of a musician myself. This is why I'm curious
Mhm.
to ask you this. Has you being a musician and being able to use that creative mind helped with your design or with running games or anything like that at all?
Well, so my background is really with jazz.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and with jazz, like I hear about people who, they went for improv, or like they have an improv or acting background and that's what got them into D&D.
Yeah.
But
I
for
have actually have
me,
a jazz background as well, so that's
oh
why.
really?
Yeah. Long
Cool.
time ago, not anymore, but I was a saxophone player and I used to play in a little local band when I was in college, but then nursing
Alto,
school.
tenor, Barry,
Alto, yeah, alto and
alto?
soprano.
Nice. Who is there? I guess if you had like one big inspiration, who would it be? Parker?
Man, that's a good question. I really liked Coltrane, John
Yeah.
Coltrane. That's
Oh
probably
yeah.
one of my inspirations for sure.
Yeah. Whenever it comes to alto, like I'm a huge Hank Mobley fan.
Okay.
Like Paul Desmond. Paul Desmond's just got this like, ooh, creamy, lush, like ooh.
Yeah.
But like I think Hank Mobley, if you want that like, I always tell people like, before you listen to Charlie Parker, you should check out Hank Mobley, because Hank Mobley I think is a good like gateway into bebop for people who don't really get, why are these guys playing stuff at 180 beats per minute, and these scales don't make any sense.
Right, right.
I think Hank Mobley's that good like interim into that, but um, yeah. But with jazz, I mean, a key part of that is always the improv side of it, and I think the structure to it was something that I felt like I kind of understood with like, with jazz we have these uh, with these harmonic progressions, and this is like our guideline for like, oh, okay, well over a B major seven, I'm using a B, major scale. If I'm going over, D minor seven, I'm going to use like D Dorian or some variation, whatever. So like with those guidelines, I think my brain got kind of hardwired into like, well, okay, so when the improv is point for point for point, and jazz is like the same way, right? Like if I'm writing notes as a DM, I'm thinking more so about like here's a beat right here, here's a beat right here that we got to hit, and I try to tell stories in the same way that we're taught about like improvising, where it's like you try to start out. You don't just go into a solo like well, you do that, and then your audience is going to be like, What'd you just hit me with, right? Um, there's a really great solo. If somebody wants to like hear, I guess whoever's listening to this, like what I mean by this, they always say whenever you're soloing in jazz, you try to tell a story, and you start with a beginning fundamental idea, build into it somehow, prove that there's some tension, you give it its climax and then eventual release, and that's story arc. I mean, it's the same thing. And for anybody who like wants to hear what I think is like a perfect solo for this, is Corey Henry's solo on Lingus by Snarky Puppy. It is a it is like a 5 minute long keyboard solo that is like a masterpiece. Like, oh my god, yeah, you even if you're not a jazz head, it is really a rock solo in a jazz band. It's so sick. But yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm glad I asked you this question because I don't know locally any other like musicians or former musicians, and I've always explained that to people. I'm like, yeah, this improv thing with D&D, I don't know, man. I really feel like I got it from being in music and just kind of like
Yeah.
I kind of like learned. I call it I learned dirty. Like, what's the key? Played by ear. Like, I
Right.
took music theory in like high school, but then after that, I like went to my local church and then found a band, and it was like, hey, what key you guys playing in? All right, cool, and just kind of feeling it and going from there for so many years, and it's like, yeah, that definitely, like you said, like telling a story just with music. I don't know.
There are some nasty, and I mean just like, oh, stanky church players. Like, I mean, that guy I just talked about, Corey Henry, grew up playing, Hammond B3, and like, oh my god, man, there's just some stuff that he does that I'm like, how do you feel that? Like, I mean, like the drummer's doing some Jay Dilla like way drunk beat stuff or whatever, and then Corey Henry's just over here like it's gospel, but it's like, oh my god, gospel
Yeah,
hasn't like banged that hard. Like, yeah.
yeah, that's awesome, man. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh yeah, no, totally.
So you and YouTube, how did you come across that?
Totally randomly. So I think like I hate saying like I didn't see this in the TTRPG community, and then like someone will eventually come along and be like, well, this other guy was doing that thing, so like, but so back then, I guess if the guy who first made me think that like I really wanted to do YouTube in a sense was Total Biscuit, and Total Biscuit was like, looking at games. I'm big on art appreciation, and to me, a lot of people look at Total Biscuit and just think like he's this cynical asshole who like just trashes bad games, like or like newer games or whatever. And I'm like, no, like what he's doing is trying to talk about games as a art form here. And part of that art form, we talk about music, we talk about records in the same way that he's talking about video games. Like so I really liked what he was doing and his approach to talking about video games. And whenever I say this infamous line, I guess, I hadn't really seen anybody else talking about that with TTRPGs, and like really trying to dissect like design intention to try and dissect why a TTRPG made us feel this way, right? Like, I think anything that is made to elicit emotion can be considered artwork. I think that's one of the very definitions of it. Like, anything that is creative expression is art. So, to me, a TTRPG is an art form. And I tried, I think, bringing that outlook into the YouTube sphere. And I was terrible at it at first, because I was like, I didn't know anything about camera quality, microphone, or anything, or like editing. It was just I was going by the seat of my pants, and I don't even know what camera I was even trying to record off nowadays, or back then rather. But I had this like old Zoom, like it wasn't even a condenser mic or anything. It was meant for you're supposed to plug in XLRs into it, but I was just going off of the pre-built in mic, like the stock mic on there sounded terrible. I've since deleted all those old videos and reshot them and everything. But yeah, so really it was like trying to bring another kind of look at the game. I think that there was also a thing that kind of nagged at me a bit where it seemed like whenever we were talking about whether or not something was balanced or imbalanced, that was always a subjective argument online. And I was like, surely we can make a methodology for understanding like the intent behind a design, and then like why certain things are or aren't quote unquote balanced in the game, right? So this is where like I tried to, I mean, there's terms that have been formalized before, like bag of rats. That's not a Terran idiom. That thing's been around since like at least third edition. Uh, I tried to formalize some things. I think like wish fallacy is something I've tried to like. I try to refute a couple of these arguments that come up a lot. Wish fallacy is like no piece of game kit can ever be broken in a game that has the wish spell. It's like, well, yes, it absolutely can. That's not a measure for balance, like uh, or like the DM fiat argument where nothing in the game can possibly be broken because the DM can just fix it later. Like that. No, we can't apologize for lazy design or So some people really like the way I talk about the game. A lot of people hate it, and that's fine. And I totally get it. Um, I think whenever someone is critical of a thing you like, I think your first blush of that can come off as this person is just dogging on a thing I like, and not necessarily like this guy actually really likes the thing I like, so much so that he's willing to be critical on it, right? And yeah.
Okay, I have this question, and I'm curious. If you don't want to answer, no problem. I'm just curious to get your opinion on it. So I went through your YouTube channel, over the past, I guess, month now, and I remember watching your videos, and obviously you have your video where you talked about your injuries and everything that happened with that. So you said you started playing D&D in like 2015 ish. So was that in the kind of the middle of between like your surgeries and everything?
About, I'd say over like 90% of the surgeries that have been done so far were done before 2015. So I've had about, I want to say it's like 34 to 37 surgeries at this point. Just, reconstructive stuff and, but no, like the D&D stuff, I think ever since I got into D&D, I may have only had two operations since then, and they've both been on my teeth.
Curious to see like how did you, I guess, build up the confidence, because YouTube is something I've tried a few times. I failed, coming over the confidence of putting myself in front of the camera. How did you get over that? And I'm not saying just because of your what happened to you, just
Oh,
in
right, right,
general.
right, right. Like, oh, I mean, I totally get it. Putting yourself out there is always a nerve-wracking thing. It doesn't matter if you had half your face blown off, like, so and part of it's just kind of been like, I think there was more like inner, like introspective stuff that I had to come over more so than the outer stuff. uh, like worries about like, are people gonna hate this thing I say, and then I'll never be able to like do anything ever again, or like I think this phobia gets built up of like everything you've been building ruining because like someone misinterprets something you say, right? That's always been a bigger worry for me than I mean, someone coming on my stream and calling me a pirate. I was like, okay, like I don't know, I guess I'll own that. Whatever. But yeah, like I think all in all, the thing like no one's really, for the most part, most people are pretty cool about it, you know. Or like the fact that I'm wearing an eye patch kind of gives me a brand in a way where there's not too many people that like actually, wear the thing because they need it or, in like every video. So in a way, I just kind of decided to own it as like a brand. It's even in like the avatar I commissioned and all that stuff. So like, I own that. I think just being open and honest with people about like, hey, if you got a question about it, like ask away. I'm cool with it, And I think being that casual and open about it has helped out a lot. I'm not saying everyone should do that, but I mean, it's something that's helped me. And some parts of it I just feel like I had to kind of jump in the deep end, like yeah.
Sweet. And then you've been doing YouTube for a few years now. Did it ever come a point where everything just maybe clicked and like, all right, I got it, I can do this kind of thing? Or was you always just kind of started like, yeah, this is where, did you have it planned out from the beginning as far as like where your end goal would be?
Not really. I think even less so after the OGL snafu, right? Like right now is honestly the least whenever I say least confident, it's more so that like I just don't really know what TTRPG YouTube wants, right? Like cuz you make a D&D video, you get blasted about making D&D videos. You make another game or you make another video about a different TTRPG and no one watches it, right? Like so it's a weird kind of space where like after the OGL thing, like you talk about D&D stuff. I mean, these days there's comments I get all the time about people that are like, "Wow, uh way for you to go right back to WotC after having, whatever." And then whenever I do another video on another TTRPG that I'm like, "This is doing something cool," it maybe gets like 700 views. As if I'm lucky, right? Like I really loved Miru by Kinakoto, or is it Kinakoto? I want to say that's right. I could be totally wrong on that. I've got the book right there, but I don't want to screw up my bookshelf. But Hinakoto maybe. But it's a solo RPG and it's a very different kind of an experience. And it's kind of more of like a choose your own adventure format. But I thought that there were a lot of ideas in there that I thought were really cool and played it on stream. And then it got like, for a 4-hour video, it got like 500 views. And then I'll do like an Unearthed Arcana, like, okay, well, here's what's happening in this thing. And then boom, 2,000 plus. Or I'll do like a 4-minute video about my opinions on AI DMs. And it's up in the, 1,000, 2,000 range. So I'm like, what's happening here? Is the TTRPG space kind of like switched to where we only want to hear WotC bashing or D&D news, or like are we willing to hear about something else? And yeah, it's just it's an odd time to be a TTRPG YouTuber. Like really weird.
Yeah, and that's something that I've kind of trying to been, I guess, watch if you want to call it that. With Critical Role making their own game, Matt Cover making their own game, everyone's kind of like going off and doing like it's like a free no man's land where
It's a
everyone's
renaissance.
yeah, it's cool. It's interesting. It's just kind of seeing like what happens next. I feel like we're on the cusp of
Yeah,
something.
it's weird, but like the thing I would say is like anytime I felt this like apprehension, right? Like some of the best concerts I ever played in my life, I was the most nervous about going into, right? Like this is a time where I'm like I feel a lot of anxiety about what's happening right now, what's going to happen. but I know because I've felt that anxiety so many times before, something really cool is coming up. And that's I'm like that it's going to be worth it. We just, something's going to happen. If it's the death of the D&D brand, so be it, and like see what else comes up. But yeah.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. And speaking about TTRPGs, what's your style? Like, are you more of like a rules as written guy? I know you like to see, what's balanced in terms of like actually like the design of it. Are you more of like a homebrew kind of fast and loose improv?
I mean, if I say rule of cool, it makes it sound like the rules are just like we can totally bend them or whatever. It's For me, it's like the rules are there mostly to like serve as a way to keep the game integrity in check. But like if I'm playing 5e in particular, like I really barely, and some people are gonna crucify me for this. Um, I really barely like pay much attention to a monster stat block because it's just ingrained in my head. Like, here's what like at this CR, this is what is likely to be a challenging fight, right? So if I need to do something on the fly like that, that's what I'll do. Whenever it comes to monsters or something, I was a part of a project called Home Field Advantage, where we just basically plugged in a lot of layer actions to like every monster stat block, and that is another mentality that I think kind of feels really good about D&D, is thinking more about the environment rather than yeah. But that's a 5e specific thing. But for my particular style, it's like I it all depends on the genre. Right now, I really, really like what they're doing with like Merkborg and Death in Space. Like, I just like Meat Grinder. That feels very fun. It's a nice breath of fresh air from the everything gets hit with Nerf bat style power fantasy of D&D. Just like it's not so impactful when your character dies because it takes you 20 seconds to roll up another character. And that's fun. That's fun. But like, I really want to I feel like I'm going to go crazy for Shadow Dark for a while once I get my physical book of that. I feel like that's going to be the hotness. And I want to get more into Dragon Bane as well. But I think I like the lower end of fantasy, what I call pulp fantasy if I'm talking Vagabond. Uh, rather than the power fantasy of D&D. I feel like a game like D&D has kind of gotten way out of its own like numbers. But yeah, whenever we're at the table, mostly it's like what you guys have on your character sheet is a guideline that's kind of dictating to me how good you should relatively be at doing a thing. But the thing that kind of set me on the path of Vagabond and the way that that's constructed is I hate improvising DCs. I cannot stand improvising checks for every single die roll that's going to happen. Yeah, or even following a module to a T and say, oh well, they didn't get this thing because the DC was this high instead. I'm like, I that feels like it almost wants to make the DM a bad guy, and I would rather the players know what they need to hit all the time, and then like I just go with that. I'm like, all right, cool. Well, that's the direction the story's going. I like loose reins. Yeah.
That's cool. That's an interesting perspective. It kind of reminds me of Runehammer in a way, where Runehammer with his room design, where everything's DC this or DC that, depending on how difficult you want the game. That's a cool aspect. So your Kickstarter, what's that like? You've been doing YouTube, and then you finally decide to put, I guess, step into the ring, if you want to call it that. What's
I,
that like?
I like step into the ring. I'm gonna yeah. Well, my dad was a boxer, so I'm all about all those. I reference Muhammad Ali and Tyson all the time on my channel. Uh, so what was Kickstarter like?
Or just in general, all of it, I guess. Whatever avenue you want to go is cool with me.
Anxiety for sure. Worry about like whether or not this project's gonna hit. What are you gonna do? What are your last resorts? Do you need to throw on a bunch of stretch goals to get people to whatever? But it was a learning experience. When I am happy to have done, and what I love more about the Kickstarter was it showed, I, I guess, in the YouTube sphere, it can feel a little bit quiet and lonely at times. Where like you're over here chugging away at making content, and it kind of feels like all the guys that you're like, yeah, I'd like to be doing stuff like that, just don't really comment on your videos or whatever, and so you feel like, maybe they're not like, I don't know, maybe they're not into what I'm doing or whatever. But like, whenever I did my Kickstarter and I was like, all right, we're doing it. This is, I've got a system core here that is different from anything else on the market right now, and I really like it. Whenever I did that Kickstarter, it was like I was getting hit up by YouTubers who I had either watched or like, inspired me to like take on D&D YouTube, and they were like, "What can I do to help out?" And that was the coolest thing, was like, getting hit up by Tree Up Monk, and he was like, "Hey, I want to see what I can do to help out. Do you have a link that I can like share, whatever?" Dungeon Dad, Steely Sam, all these guys reaching out. That was the coolest feeling, really. Of course, seeing it cross that threshold, but like seeing other YouTubers supporting what I was doing just meant so much. Yeah, that,
That's
yeah.
awesome. Do you think the OGL was not the deciding factor, but a deciding factor in you releasing it when you did, or
It it originally did kind of start as a bit of a spite driven project, right? Where I was like, I've got to do something that, like, even if I have to use the 5e system core that's in the Creative Commons, then like, screw it. We're making a game that WotC can't screw with, right? Uh, but as I was messing with it, I was like, there's honestly way too much about this that I just, as I've explored other games or like kind of have my own thoughts on game design, I just don't like and I don't want to use. So with like Vagabond, I threw out initiative, like it's gone. I'm no longer doing turn-based combat anymore. It's group. Um, there's I hate Vancian magic. Never wanted to deal with it again. Chucked it out. Um, I am also not a really big fan of backgrounds, as weird as that might sound. I think anything other than your ancestry and your class is just bloat, and it's stuff that, like, if we're factoring it in 5e, really, whenever I make my background, how often am I looking at that on my character sheet? You know, Even the features are just ribbons. So, like, it's giving me equipment, we can put that somewhere else. It's giving me some skills, we can put that somewhere else. Yeah, and it's I what I loved in particular about like a game like Shadow Dark was just how much Kelsey did from design from reduction, and that's why that game feels so good, is because it is clean, super clean, and that's kind of what I've been focusing on with Vagabond. Was I was like, what are the modern conventions that are cool and feel good, and what can I look at critically as bloat that's been tacked on over the years? And that's kind of what it's like. Everyone always jokes in the Vagabond Discord about like every new update, it seems like Terran's gonna remove something fundamental to TTRPGs. like, they're like, oh yeah, next time we're not even gonna be playing with dice. We're just gonna have like a coin and just flip it and make decisions, But yeah, so yeah, I'm trying to. Here's the thing: like every time that we've done this, it's just felt right, and getting away from scores and modifiers and just doing a straight up, this is the stat number right here, and what does that mean? If I tell someone, well, you have a 13 in the stat, so it means you have a +1 to over here. They're like, where are these numbers coming from? What do you? So with Vagabond, you'll know, like, I have a 5 in might. Cool. That means that I need to roll a 15 or above with a sword to hit. Or if I'm trained with it, I have to roll a 10 or above. That trying to make things quicker that way. Yeah. The math easier, I
yeah,
guess.
absolutely. So as far as you said your YouTube, you're doing something you hadn't seen before. You're talking about the design aspects of different things. How are you incorporating that philosophy or ideal that you enjoy with your YouTube channel into Vagabond?
I think the audience engagement is a huge factor with it, right? Um, I am. The cool thing has been there's been so many people in my audience who have already played the game, and they're giving me active feedback on it. It's been exciting to like do update streams where I let people know like here's what all's going on, because like they're even outperforming my D&D streams. Like except for like maybe Unearthed Arcana drops. Other than that, like Vagabond streams are always doing way better. Um, so like having that active engagement, um, hearing the audience's live reactions, right? To like, here's what I'm considering doing in the game, has meant a lot. It has it. I don't know that it has necessarily changed my design philosophy, but it's made me feel more confident about this was the right decision or this was the wrong decision, right? Like there was a point where I considered getting rid of mana, which is like the spell casting resource. And I was like, can we get rid of this element of tracking here and do something a little bit easier? And that got such bad pushback that I was like, okay, you know what? But the cool thing was, it wasn't just like, we don't like that. It was people that knew the system from playing it well enough that were like, how, wait, this is causing issues with this right here or this right here. How does this resolve these other pieces of kit that you've already built into the game? And I was like, okay, wait, mana's coming back. So it wasn't just feels, it was real mechanical critique of what I had written. And that was the coolest thing. I was like, you guys got me. Like, yeah, all right. Like
That's awesome. Wow.
yeah.
Okay. I have a few more questions, and you guys in the audience, if you would like to come up to the stage, so to speak, and talk directly to Indestructoboy and ask him a question, you guys can hit that microphone to request, and I'll bring you up at the Q&A at the end of the show. I've already talked to Indestructoboy. I think he's cool with that.
Yeah.
All
Absolutely.
right, sweet. So just a few more questions for you. So your current position, you got YouTube, you've got Kickstarter. I think you kind of heading towards, I guess, the content creator TTRPG dream, where you kind of like have your own thing and kind of just like self sufficient on YouTube and everything. Has the lens of the hobby changed for you in any kind of way?
Ooh, like how I look at the TTRPG hobby? Oh, it evolves every month. Like easy, easy. I mean, it always seems like the big discussion going on right now is AI stuff, right? So now it's like, well, the whole industry is about to experience like, we all these jobs that we were fighting for during the OGL thing, it's like, oh, it's more at risk now because actual big publishers and Kickstarters are just using AI art, and it's going to be like the way that they go. Uh ethically for me, I'm like, I want a human touch on everything. I feel a lack of quality anytime I'm seeing a lot of AI stuff on projects, but it's a feels thing, I guess. But yeah, like whenever I first got started, not really knowing a whole lot of people and just kind of taking my like, shots in the dark at it. Um, and I guess after like the first year, whenever I got partnership, it was like, ooh, okay, so that's cool. Like people actually like watching the stuff I make. All right. And then so that was around 2019, and that's whenever all the like Mike Merle's stuff kind of went down, and I really liked what Mike was doing with the Happy Fun Hour stuff, and I was like, because I don't know if maybe people in the chat don't really know, but the Mike Merle's Happy Fun Hours where he used to live stream stuff that they were going to put into the game as like Unearthed Arcana and kind of talk about what his thoughts were while they were making it, and I thought that that was a super cool thing. And then the controversy with Mike happened, and that went away. But I was like, well, I kind of like that, and I make content for D&D, so why don't I just live stream it, right? So it went from like scripted content to live stream format to clipping stuff from my live streams and putting it on my channel, to turning into like a big homebrew hub now. and turning into, I guess, what it is today. Uh, for about, I guess you could say for about 2 months there, I was in the TTRPG drama side of YouTube, but
Sure.
um, yeah, yeah. But yeah, it has evolved just because, like, I think the industry evolves, you know? And as the industry evolves, we all are going to naturally just change in one way or another. Sorry, my dog just opened up my
It's
studio
all
door.
good. All good, man. Next question. This one I actually meant to ask at the beginning, but I got excited and lost with talking about music. In the Advanced Dungeon Master's Guide, there's the foreword written by Mike Carr, and he poses the question: dungeon mastering or game mastering, is it an art or is it a science? So, in your opinion, what is it? Is it an art, a science, both, neither, something else altogether?
I mean, it's definitely an art, because I mean, we've got the performance of it, we've got the fact that there's something you are creating that is made to elicit emotion of some kind, right? So I think by that very definition, it objectively has to be an art. As far as the science of it goes, I think that all depends on how much of that you want to inject into what you're doing. Because I mean, if you want to science it out to where, like, this is a perfectly designed encounter as per the numbers, like, you want to go that far with it, I guess you can. I think that there's definitely I think this was Einstein that may have said this. Religion without science is blind. Science without religion is deaf, or lame. Lame. There we go. And it's more so about, like, why he felt like if you scienced yourself into seeing the universe as, like, there's no reason for us to experience beauty, then, like, all scientific definition is just lame. I don't know if that was Einstein or if that's just something that people say Einstein said, but he was the first person that got quoted with that whenever I read it. But yeah, I like to try to keep it a balance, and I think it should be, because I think if you go too far into one way or the other, people are going to get bored with it, or it kind of loses any sense of integrity. Like, if we go full art with it, then you're just doing an improv game, and D&D at its core. I say this all the time, but it's like it's a war game. It's a combat simulator, and there's other games that don't do the science of D&D as hard as what some people, you know, seem to not prefer. So, yeah, I think it's a healthy mix. Yeah.
I think so too. Thanks for your answer. Do you have overall a fondest memory of this hobby?
Uh Probably the time I made a table cry. Like, yeah, there was a campaign that we knew, like, it was an 8-player campaign with, like, what I would call was our, like, crew of best friends at the time. Like, this was a dream team. And everyone that was in there was just incredible at improvising. Everyone was just like, we all had a good chemistry just as friends off the table. And whenever we brought that to the table, it seemed like everyone was kind of playing an avatar of themselves in a way, and within, like, 3 sessions, you could tell that they had just instantly clicked with their characters. So, after about 6 sessions with this table, we didn't have, like, a huge long campaign with it, but there were 6 sessions that went on, and I was told by 2 of the players that they would need to leave because they were both expecting dads, right? So, like, they were both about to have their kids, and they knew that, like, life was going to be crazy, and they couldn't commit to this thing. And as, like, one of the sign-offs, it wasn't anything I had planned at all, but their 2 characters were alone and just kind of talking about, like, why what, like, the meaning of things were. One of them was playing a shard mind mastermind. The other guy was playing a just straight up a ghost that was time warped. I love time travel fantasy, but uh so they were both just kind of talking about, like, why live, why the purpose of life, why the meaning of life, or whatever. And as they're both kind of looking out, I just kind of improvised this thought where I was like, you both just see this kid kind of going after this ball that's bouncing away, and there's a man that looks to be in his 30s. going over and trying to pick this boy up that just has picked up the ball, puts him up on his shoulder as they walk away, and these two start crying, which caused like four other people at the table to start crying, and I was just like, that one little moment, I was like, oh, that felt super, just, you know. So I think that impact of like it not just being the last session that they were together, but also like the real life kind of reflections on what was going on. Um, and it was just a really good crew. And I think in terms of like a good fight, nothing quite hit quite like that. You know, that was definitely a like woof. That was a moment that we had. You know, but yeah, I think that was like my most like, mm, you really felt the art of it. You know.
That's awesome. And I guess you basically answered the last question I had for you was have you ever had a moment where these games, this hobby inspired and impacted you on a personal level? But it definitely sounds like that was probably one of them.
Yeah, that was definitely like the most like resonant. Um, yeah, yeah, I mean, and I've seen moments from like other people's games that have definitely hit me way hard. I mean, without dropping any spoilers, but like the final fight for campaign 1 of Critical Role, I think anybody that knows how that fight goes down because of the limitations of the game, it was like, wow, what an interesting quandary brought about by spell slot limitation. Like what that was just such a, yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Again, Taryn, thank you so much for your time. Everyone in the audience, you guys listening, if you would like to come up and ask a question or have something to say, you're more than welcome to do so. There is a little bit of a delay between us, the speakers, and you guys, the listeners, so I'll give you a little bit of time. But again, Instructoboy, I thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me, and it's been a pleasure.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, what all you got? I mean, are you just kind of building up around the Twitter Space format? I mean, have you really dabbled into YouTube much?
I actually have tried YouTube multiple times, and for one reason or another, either I got busy. I am a nurse, and I tried starting it right before COVID,
Hmm.
and that kind of fell off quick. I got really busy with work, and then it's something I've always wanted to try to do. And then I guess like a confidence thing, or feeling like, oh, this isn't good, whatever. But
Right.
this time is different, and I found these spaces, and I didn't see anybody using them, and I'm on YouTube and everywhere else too. But I just thought this was a really cool way to talk to people, and a different kind of live stream, I guess, where you have people that want to. Which can be kind of nerve wracking, right? To come up and talk to
For
somebody that you've
sure.
been following on YouTube. I mean, I'm definitely like talking to you and Runehammer and Dungeon Delver, and just sitting these like a cold call essentially is what I'm doing, and getting an answer back. I'm like, oh my god, I've been watching Runehammer for years, and it's being able to talk to him and you and everyone else has been cool.
From I'll honestly say, like, from getting to know everybody at like Gen Con and stuff, and like meet them in real life, that was definitely a way different experience too. Because I was just like, oh, these guys are actually just really cool people. Okay, like it's not a front. They're just. Whenever I met like Will from D&D Shorts, I was like, oh, that's him. That's his energy. And yeah, like that was a really cool, I think, refreshing thing, was thinking like, wow, a lot of these people really just are genuine. That's what they are, and I think that's why they're successful. They're real, and they want to be real with you, and that's,
Yeah,
yeah, that means a lot.
that is cool. So, Death Metal Milkman, I see you back, and it looks like he posed a question in a little comment box of the space. He says,
Oh, okay, right on.
just wanted to ask, with AI being shunned, and he put it rightfully, in TTRPGs, what innovations would you like to see in this space?
Ooh, ooh, hmm, that's interesting. Um, what innovations would I like to see in this space? Well, I guess you could say, if we're talking about a tool set, That I'm gonna have to think for a minute on, but I would say I guess easier access to physical publishing would be a huge deal, and distribution. Logistics in terms of indie developing stuff is a nightmare. I mean, if you think running a Kickstarter is anxiety driving, think about like getting 10,000 copies of a book and then having to box it, ship it, pay for shipping, figure out where it's going, deal with it not showing up. That's a nightmare, right? So like maybe an easier logistical arm to indie RPGs. I can't blame a lot of people for just only doing digital because that all sounds like it sucks, you know. Um, but what innovations? I guess with AI being shunned. I think as far as the VTT space goes, I really like what Alchemy's doing, and I want to see that develop further. And I guess it's weird because I'm so business minded on so much TTRPG stuff. Um, I guess another rival to D&D Beyond coming up that makes it to where like that's no longer something special would be huge. Like I'm cheering on Demiplane because we cannot have a monopoly. Yeah. Hopefully something like that gets more people to try other games. Um, you know, yeah. I think that something definitely needs to come along to rival D&D Beyond to shake the uh, I guess shake the accessibility of other games because that's really the edge that and I know that accessibility some people feel like it's a buzzword or whatever. Really all it is I'm like let's remove a barrier for entry to make it easier for people to like play these games. Because like, if part of the reason why you think a game is good is because the character sheet is hard to understand and you got to make a character over the course of an hour to play I don't think the game is that good, like let's make it easier, right? Like I like uh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's part of why I like Merkborg so much. That game is incredibly easy to hop in and play. So, yeah.
That's one game, unfortunately, I still haven't had a chance to play. I have like a bookshelf of games I haven't touched. I just thought looked cool and just kind of waiting for the right opportunity, you know.
Is
But
Into the Odd on there?
Into Beyond, which
Into the Odd?
Into the No, I don't have that one. The
Yeah, it looks like this. It's very pretty. Oh, I might be reversed.
Okay, no, I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah. This is like the game that really inspired Merkborg and like Death in Space. It's this was I think this game marks a pivotal like change in philosophy toward a lot of TTRPG tradition that like I mean this has inspired a lot of Vagabond right here. Into the Odd is very cool. And I got to meet Chris McDowell at Gen Con and he signed I guess for the video. What? Yeah, he signed my copy of it. And I
Nice, so
was like,
cool.
hell yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I don't want to hold you for too much longer. We've been here about an hour, and again, I thank you for your time. I guess to end this, do you have any parting words for the audience and people out there that listen to this later on in the future?
Boy, I think the TTRPG world feels really funky right now, you know? For a long, long time it seemed like the only game that we were really playing was something that turned into an absolute monster on us. And it's weird, but like I was saying earlier, I'm weirdness makes me feel optimistic. Anxiety oddly gives me that optimism because that something cool always comes out of those feelings of like terror for what could be, right? So I guess if anyone's feeling a little bit shaky as to like what's happening in the industry or whatever, I think something cool is on the horizon. And I'm not saying I'm not saying that just to hype up stuff I'm making. I'm just saying I feel like the whole world right now, a lot of eyes are on D&D, and I don't necessarily think that means that those eyes are only on D&D. Uh, yeah. Oh, and let content creators know what you want to see because we're all confused right now.